Welcome to the Beyond Jiu Jitsu podcast. My name is Kieren and I'm here with my very special co-host.
What's up, what's up, what's up?
Who's turned into a 90s gangster rapper.
What's up, guys? Adam Charles here. I don't know why I did that.
What's your credentials, Adam?
What's my credentials? I have a black belt from eBay. Fabio Gogel, black belt. Head coach and owner with my wife of Alliance Sydney Jiu Jitsu.
And I am Kieren. I am a white belt, and that is it.
No, he's selling himself short.
White belt, PT, nutritionist, YouTube superstar.
Yeah. Ex-bodybuilder, videographer.
All-round legend.
Yep.
So today, what are we talking? Oh, first of all, last episode, if you missed that episode, it was actually probably one of my favorite that we've done thus far. I mean, they've all been great, but that one was particularly special because we did our first listener Q&A in the Ask a Black Belt segment.
Yeah, which will be a bit of a recurring episode.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, just in case you missed that episode, go back and listen to it. It's fantastic. But if you want to submit questions to the show, you can jump over to our Instagram. Just search Beyond Jiu Jitsu Podcast and you'll be able to find that. Or alternatively, you can message me directly on my Instagram. It's just my full name, Kieren Lefebvre, or Adam's Instagram.
Alliance Sydney BJJ.
Alliance Sydney BJJ. I'll remember one of these days. I can't remember the order of it.
You can't remember, bro.
I'm terrible. It's one word. Okay, so in this episode, however, we are talking about why people quit jiu-jitsu. Hot topic.
People quit jiu-jitsu all the time.
But why? Let's take a deep dive. So first of all, from my perspective, I've been training jiu-jitsu for nearly 12 months and I have seen multiple people come and go just out of your gym, Adam. And I mean,
it's because I don't treat them well.
I was about to say, and just for a caveat for everyone listening who doesn't know, Adam's retention is fantastic. Like he's not that much of an asshole off air. So no, I'm not suggesting anything toward your gym individually.
No, but of course, yeah.
It's the nature of the sport.
Yeah.
So from my perspective as a white belt, I mean, I've had, I know people that have quit or have taken prolonged absences over injuries. So that's something that, that comes to mind. But apart from that, and apart from maybe logistic reasons, like notwithstanding moving away or financially, particularly with the COVID stuff, why do you think the one of the fundamental reasons people quit?
Yeah, like you said, obviously ignoring some of the obvious reasons, like, sometimes life changes, maybe someone trained while they were in uni, but now they're a doctor and they don't have time to train, or they had kids or whatever, right? So obviously sometimes just people's life and circumstances change. But I think one of the main, if we look at lower belts, wider lower belts quit jiu-jitsu, particularly white and blue belts. And for those who don't know, it's, the blue belt blues are rather infamous. And the joke is that there's more blue belts in the world than white belts because a lot of people quit at blue belt. But initially, I think why a lot of white belts quit, and one of the biggest reasons white belts quit, is because they're not treated correctly in the beginning, right? Like a lot of gyms just kind of throw white belts in the deep end. And one of the things that you unfortunately see happen is you see white belts get injured very early on when they start training jiu-jitsu. Like your business partner at Ground 9 Productions, which is Kieren's media company, was training as a white belt. And I'm not saying Zach is his name. He'll be a guest on the show at one stage.
Maybe.
Maybe if he plays his cards right.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not saying Zach was treated inappropriately, but I'm just using his as an example because we were both speaking to him yesterday. Zach wasn't treated inappropriately because I know the gym that Zach was training at. But, he was, how long he was training for, like a month or something, right?
Yeah,
not very long at all. Quite seriously injured his shoulder and now requires a full shoulder reconstruction. if you're brand new into a sport and you have that severe of an injury early on, it's a pretty massive deterrent to go back and continue to attempt that sport.
Absolutely.
You would have to be pretty addicted to a month into your sport, injure yourself that requires a surgery, and then still continue post-surgery. Some people do, but that's one of the biggest reasons beginners or white belts quit. Okay. Zach wasn't treated inappropriately, but a lot of gyms do. They just throw students in the deep end, or some fundamental movements they take for granted that beginners don't know how to do them. Like sometimes you'll get a brand new student come in and they'll be able to do cartwheels and shoulder rolls and back rolls, no problem. But then other people don't. Some people start jiu-jitsu and they haven't rolled around on the ground since they were a kid. And then you just throw them in, just follow along in the warm-up. They do a shoulder roll and dislocate their shoulder, or something like that, or break their collarbone because they just trying to follow on from these more advanced students doing these rolls that, we make look easy, and we forget that if you do them incorrectly, it's very easy to hurt your neck or your shoulder or something like that, right? So I think that's a big reason, and definitely a reason that shouldn't exist. If gym owners did the right thing, that should never happen.
So what is the right thing to do? Is it to take them through the first couple of weeks of, just basics, like have them sort of off to the side, or what approach do you personally take, or what is the ideal approach in your opinion as a gym owner?
Well, I don't want to go too sort of down the track of how you should structure your business to deal with new students. I mean, I can, but it's just kind of a bit off topic.
Yeah.
But in my opinion, some gyms don't let white belts or white belts until X stripe or whatever roll, right? And, that's one way to deal with it. I lean both ways, my opinion about that. I didn't experience that. I went into jiu-jitsu kind of being thrown in the deep end, and it didn't faze me personally, but I've seen it not work for a lot of people. So I'm on the fence, but I definitely don't have beginners who have come in with no experience. I don't have them roll from day one. Why? Not because I'm concerned that my students will injure them, but people with no experience, they injure themselves, right? So sometimes you'll have someone come in and they might be like quite fit and able, but they have no idea about jiu-jitsu or grappling. And then you put them into roll and, for lack of a better word, they tend to spaz out a little bit.
Spazzy white belt,
right? It's a thing. But the way they hurt themselves is they'll try to do a movement, let's say, I don't know, like a bridge or whatever, right? And they might be able to do that movement, but all of a sudden they're doing a bridge with 80 kilos on top of them, and they don't quite understand like where their own body is in space, where their opponent's body and weight is, and then they like throw their own back out or something like that, because they, jiu-jitsu is so dynamic. It's not linear, right? It's not like squatting or deadlifting where everything is kind of structurally
within one plane.
Yeah, right? And so they tend to hurt themselves, right? So that's the first thing. But in terms of what would I say are the kind of, the core movements that I want a day one beginner to understand, to set them up to hopefully continue with the sport and not injure themselves, right? Because obviously you can't watch them 100% of the time, all the time, unless they only did privates or something with you. But the things that I look for to make sure that, okay, I can kind of turn around and help another student and I feel okay about this person not hurting themselves. I want them to know the 4 core movements, which for me are shoulder roll, back roll, technical stand-up, and hip escape. And definitely I spend a lot of time on the shoulder roll and back roll because, I've had people come in that you'll spend so long with them trying to teach them how to do it, and they still roll over their neck and hurt themselves,
Yeah, I've
right?
seen that.
Yeah, there's some people that just do it first go, right? Everyone's different. So I want them to understand those 4 core movements. The analogy I often give is I say, look, if this were boxing, that's kind of your jab, cross, hook, uppercut, right? I need you to know those 4 things. And then I definitely make sure they understand tapping and what it means. Because, again, it's something we take for granted. Not everyone walks in and they've watched a bunch of MMA or UFC or whatever and understand. Some people don't even know, right, what that is. So I make sure they understand tapping, and I make it very clear to a beginner adult the same way I make very clear to kids, right? Like, I think there's a lot of crossover between how you teach kids and how you teach like a day one adult, right? I make it very clear that they can tap at any time, right? And I would, for example, with the kids, sometimes you see the kids like they'll tap. I'm like, why do you tap? And they go, I'm thirsty. But I would prefer that than the kids not to tap and hurt themselves, right? Yeah. And I say the same to the adults as well, right? Because you don't know, right? Is this someone who's going to push too far? Like, you don't know, right? So I make sure they understand that.
Yeah, that's clear.
The 5th thing that I make that I always want to, the 5th and last thing that I always want to make sure I, as an instructor, understand to best kit out this beginner to hopefully train jiu-jitsu for an extended period of time is I want to know why they're looking at jiu-jitsu. And I think that's not so much about how you make them not get injured, but that's just more so you can treat them appropriately so they can get the most out of it. And what I mean by that is if you ask someone like, why do you want to train jiu-jitsu? And they say, I want to be an MMA fighter. Okay. That's different to someone who says, I'm just, my therapist suggested it might be good for me. Like they're two completely different people that have walked into the gym for 2 completely different reasons, so you could already kind of assume that guy who wants to be an MMA fighter is probably going to already want to roll super hard and all this.
Exclusively no gi.
Yeah. You're like, I train some MMA with my friends all the time,
Yeah.
Opposed to someone who's like, I have a lot of issues with personal space or whatever. And, my therapist suggested this and that, so that's going to help you as an instructor, help give them the best tools to set them on their jiu-jitsu journey. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So you're able to tailor their experience toward their expectations, their goals, and why they're there. And that's going to help with their, not only their learning, they're going to feel like an individual, but it's also, client retention for your business. And there's a whole lot of things going into that. So I think that ticks off the making sure that white belts or new beginners to the sport, we'll just say, are, well equipped to avoid injury in the first few months.
Yeah.
But apart from injuries like Zach with his shoulder reco and everything, why else do you think
Another
people
reason?
quit? Yeah, why do people quit at white and blue belt? And what's with the blue belt? I think blue belt blues would be a good place to pick this up. Why do people quit at blue belt?
Well, before we move on to the blue belt, just one more, why white belts quit before we get to blue belt is I think as well another reason. Let's say, imagine they've been treated really well from the beginning, given all the tools to start their jiu-jitsu journey. They haven't had anyone mistreat them or they haven't had any injuries or anything. Another reason why people quit is, they just suddenly realize it's much harder than they thought it was. Not for everyone. Some people are naturals at whatever they choose to do, right? But sometimes you get people who maybe they've been doing it for 6 months and they thought it was going to be this thing that it wouldn't take long before they were this killer or something. And you see sometimes people just kind of realize that it's really, really hard, and in 6 months they're not kicking everyone's ass. And that can kind of demotivate them, because it is a never-ending grind. For me, that's what I like about jiu-jitsu, right? That it's not just kind of, once I've learned A to Z, I'm done, I'm qualified, it's never ending, right? This permanent pursuit of knowledge and evolution of the sport. But some people don't want that. Some people think, they get into it because they want to just learn how to kick ass, and then hang on, I'm not learning how to kick ass because this thing takes years and years and is really hard, and they quit. Or some people are a little too driven by the belt, right? And then they go, wait, most people take more than 10 years to get a black belt. Oh, I'm out. I'll go do Taekwondo. 3 years, black belt, baby,
Yeah, right.
So that's another reason I think white belts, like the penny can drop where they realize, oh, this isn't some, it's more of a, if you want to achieve that goal, it's a lifelong thing, Okay, not all gyms. Some gyms just hand out the belts willy-nilly, but you know what I mean? Like it's forever. And even when you start getting good, there's always someone who'll kick your ass. Right. And if you're not into that, like you see that happen to tough guys a lot. Tough guys who come into gyms, they realize that they're not a tough guy anymore. And they didn't want that. They just wanted to be in an environment where they're like a
tough guy.
Yeah. What's the expression? Like big fish, little ponds sort of thing.
Yeah, 100%.
But if we
it's just their ego, right? You're saying that
an ego thing for sure.
For some people, like their ego gets too much in the way. And that's when people like more influential people that talk on jiu-jitsu that aren't necessarily jiu-jitsu athletes, but the likes of Jocko Willink. He talks about, the ego being, your enemy in jiu-jitsu, and it's humbling and keeping your ego in check. Yeah. In my Jocko impression there. So,
well, some people have a lot of problems with that. I mean, obviously, if you're looking at a competitive environment, if you're looking at a mat full of competitors doing competition training, of course there'll always be egos, right? And I get that, like it's a balancing act. And I've seen heated, like almost fist fights break out in competition training, but you definitely do need to try keep it in check. If you're someone who's just picking up jiu-jitsu as a hobby, you have no choice. You have to kind of almost have no ego or you won't survive. Because I've seen people as well get really down on themselves when they're losing on the mats that maybe let's say, for example, they're a brown belt but they're losing to this 4-stripe blue belt or something. And I'm like, yeah, but man, like you got to remember, like you're a brown belt who has 3 kids, runs your own business and trains once, maybe twice a week. And this is a blue belt who trains twice a day, every day, and just won worlds at blue belt. And you kind of
levels within levels.
Yeah, you kind of got to leave your ego, man. It's fine to lose to that guy. Like it's different. You can't compare.
I wouldn't lose to that guy. I'm joking.
To the brown belt.
Yeah.
You can't compare those two things, right? So, I mean, what Jocko's saying, leave your ego aside. If it's a group of competitors, it's slightly different, but you do need to try. A good example is when I used to train with Bernardo from BJJ Fanatics, he had no ego. Like the guy is 4-time black belt world champion. He's an absolute world champion as well. And in the gym, I would see him sometimes train so hard with the other like super heavyweight black belts. But I also saw him like, not lose, but like I would see him get swept or get his guard passed or whatever by blue belts and stuff because he's just in the gym and he's training, and it's like it's not about winning or losing in the gym. It's his teammates and he's, working on whatever technique or this or that. Like there's no ego. I never saw him get, pissed off because he lost, with little air quotes, he lost to a lower belt, right? Because he didn't, whereas if you see some people with a massive ego, they would, right? Like on the flip side, I've rolled with people who have such an ego problem, they won't even let you, sweep or pass them or submit them if you're flow rolling. Like that's quite, it's like an inside joke in jiu-jitsu, right? Like that you go, oh, let's flow roll, and it turns into a fully heated roll.
Yeah.
Man, I've trained with people who have such an ego that even when the coach is like, all right, guys, you're going to do a 5-minute flow roll to warm up, Like for those who don't know, a flow roll is give and take. I kind of, let you pass and maybe you put me in an armbar, but then you'll let me escape the armbar. Man, I've rolled with people who have such an ego that in their mind that if you sweep them in a flow roll, like they can't handle it because it's like their ego's so massive and it's just, it's tiresome.
Yeah, that you hit the nail on the head right at the end. Like it is.
That's
tiresome.
why I don't flow roll with you, bro.
Yeah,
you just
man.
can't handle it.
No, I can't handle it. Absolutely. Because I win normally. Is that what you're saying? No, yeah, it is tiresome and it's just boring. It's like, get over yourself, I suppose. But, okay, so apart from having a big ego at white belt, blue belts. So you've made it to the blue belt blues. Wonder what they're like. Maybe I'll learn one day. Joking. So you've made it to blue belt, so you know something, right? Expectation is that you know the foundations, you know the basic movements. I think that you describe it that you need to understand at least one move to work with in each of the core positions, and there's 4 core positions.
I mean, that was one of the questions last episode, right?
Yeah.
Like,
that was in the Q&A.
What should each belt focus on? Wasn't
there like 5 positions, and then there's like a reverse of that, so that's 10 techniques, right?
Yeah. So if I spoke about, I ignored stand up for a second, which is often done in jiu-jitsu. But the 5 core positions on the ground of close guard, half guard, side control, mount, and back control.
Yep.
Each position has a top and bottom.
Yes.
So if you knew hypothetically one from each position, that's only 10 techniques to have an idea of what's going on.
Yeah.
But so if you've made it to blue belt, why do so many people quit at blue belt? Man, the blue belt blues. I mean, it's a lot of factors that then it becomes compounding factors, right? Blue belt's notoriously quite a hard belt to progress off of to purple belt. Some people, look, I mean, you could find arguments for white belt being the hardest, blue belt being the hardest, clickbait, purple belt's the hardest belt, but blue belt is notoriously the hardest belt because you're not like a beginner anymore. Like you're not wearing a white belt anymore, but you're still not like, you're not a purple belt yet. Purple belt's a bit closer to being like, okay, I'm branching into advanced territory. And blue belt takes so long. And that's one of the biggest things that deter people. If you look at the IBJJF regulations, they have minimum time periods for each belt, and the minimum time period for blue, and I always say this whenever I reference IBJJF, it's if you care about them as a federation, right? Some people don't. But if you follow IBJJF regulations, it's a minimum 2 years at blue belt. So even if you're training twice a day, every day, you're still at blue belt for a minimum of 2 years. But that's a minimum, right? So what if you're someone who trains a bit more as a hobby every now and again, right? You could be blue belt 4 or 5 years. If you took a group of 100, black belts or 100 belts post blue and asked them how long they were a blue belt, 2 years would be the minority. The majority of people are blue belts for well over 2 years.
So in your opinion, and for someone that does grading, you've awarded these belts, would you say that from white to blue is, notwithstanding someone that shows up, once a week or once every other week or whatever, if you're showing up fairly regularly, so all even Steven across the board, that, within about, depending on the individual, it's basically a matter of time, right? So
to get blue belt?
To get blue belt, it's like, I don't want to take it away from blue belts, but is it a matter of like showing up consistently for a time period rather than necessarily a distinct skill level? Obviously, they need to meet the standard, but I'm trying to tread carefully here. But
look, I get what you're saying. I don't want to take anything away from blue belts. Earning a blue belt is an awesome achievement, and
because as we spoke about, not many people make it.
A lot of people quit before that.
Yeah.
And I'm proud and impressed with anyone who has achieved a blue belt. In saying that, part of what you're saying is true. It's not in the scheme of jiu-jitsu, it's not that hard to achieve. I mean, it's by default, it's the easiest belt to get, right? It should get progressively harder.
It should
right?
be.
It should be
belt.
the easiest belt. I don't want to say it's the factor is just time. I mean, for some people it is, right? Each gym sets their own standards.
Yeah.
For me, it depends on how willing you are to bribe me. And the better the bribe.
Well, you should have mentioned that earlier. My name's Kieren. I'm a blue belt.
Next episode.
Yeah.
And we start having a camera, and I'm sitting here in a ball and gold chain, a sideways baseball cap,
How
with
rich
the
do you think I
sticker
am?
still on.
$1 million. You've derailed yourself.
I've derailed myself. Now I'm just thinking about what you're going to get me.
We're talking about time.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, there's multiple factors, but then once you get the blue belt, most gyms follow that sort of IBJJF regulations. So you're there for a minimum of 2 years. It's a long time of having white belts trying to, and people who in the jiu-jitsu gym, most people have some level of competitiveness in them, right? Because, when you roll, you're competing with your partner to some extent. We could talk a lot about mindset and, you're actually competing against yourself, blah, 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 blah. But people who continue to train, they have some level of they like to compete, right? Because you're rolling with other people and you want to win against them. So 2 years is a long time to have white belts constantly trying to show that they're on your level, right? And you constantly have purple belts trying to show that, no, you're not on my level yet. So it's a long time. And I mean, that happens at every belt, right? That happens at purple belt. You have blue belts trying to prove and brown belts trying to hold you down, right? So, I mean, it's a long time to be there. And your progress in jiu-jitsu, you have times where you feel like you progress quick and feel like you're getting worse. And it's hard because if you don't compete, as in go and do competitions all the time, what's your reference point for your progression? Well, it's only your teammates, right, that you train with on a daily basis. And so you're constantly comparing yourself. I'm comparing myself to my roles against Kieren, my roles against, Zach, whoever, right? But they're progressing as well, right? It's not like they're stagnant in their progress. So you're trying to compare your progression against someone else who is also progressing, So you can kind of get really down on yourself and feel like it's just never ending. And I mean, I wasn't one of those people who sat at blue belt for 5 years. I was at blue belt for, I think, 2.5. And even then, it would have only been 2 years. But
You've had an injury in there.
I had a knee surgery while I was a blue belt. And I actually even got my purple belt while I think I'd only just come back to drilling.
Right.
Like I still was kind of recovering from the surgery. But anyway, so I was at blue belt for close to the minimum amount of time. And even, I even felt the grind, of like 2 years and kind of, even though it wasn't about the belt, it kind of, is a little bit about the belt. And I think that also leads into putting stripes on belts, right?
Yeah.
Previously, Fabio didn't used to give stripes at all, right? And for those who don't know, there is actually no difference between what do the stripes on the belt mean in terms of the ranking. If you were to go compete, it doesn't mean anything, right? Like a blue belt with no stripes and a blue belt with 4 stripes, they're still in the blue belt division.
Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but there is no sanctioned stripe under IBJJF. It is not a thing. So some gyms don't give any.
The only stripes that are sanctioned are black belts with degrees, right?
Yes.
On colored belts, the stripes don't mean anything other than your progression. So that's the same way that IBJJF tries to set some governing rules over minimum time at belts and stuff. But in terms of when you change belts, that's up to your individual gym and instructor. And it's the same with stripes. So some gyms don't give any stripes.
Yeah.
Some gyms give stripes and they give them really quickly. Some gyms give stripes based on performance, some on time, like, you know.
Yeah, some on attendance, yeah.
Yeah. But really, what is the purpose of stripes on a belt? It's just a recognition to the student that they're on the right path. Because if we look at blue belt and you go, okay, it's a minimum of 2 years with nothing until you get a purple belt, right? But if throughout that 2 years you get a stripe every now and again, right, up to a maximum of 4 stripes, it's some level of, you know, a pat on the back. To some degree, it's no different to when you have a job, and it makes a huge difference in a job if every now and again your boss says, man, good work, nice job.
Yeah,
that makes a massive difference.
Positive reinforcement. And for some people, that is incredibly important.
Dude, it's huge.
I've actually, so I did a video on getting my first stripe or whatever, and in the comments of that
just
video,
remind me, I got to take that back.
Yeah. You bastard. Yeah, and in the comments, like people, you know, I encourage people to comment, you know, when you got your first stripe, blah, blah, blah. And the difference in time between individuals is insane. Some people are coming in and saying, like, I got a stripe in 2 weeks. Others are saying, I haven't been awarded a stripe in over a year and I train 3 times a week, you know, and it's just so variable depending on the gym, depending on the individual, because it's not like a sanctioned thing.
Yeah. And yeah, my advice would be for anyone who's listening and is currently in that blue belt, sort of blue belt blues, right? My advice would be to not put too much weight on stripes, because exactly like you said, some gyms give them out super quick,
and some would just forget.
some forget, right? You know,
like legitimately,
depending on the size of their gym, you know, and the amount of students that they have. Some gyms only give stripes during grading events, right? So you got to wait that, you know, once a year, twice a year that it happens. It's very common that gyms give that first white belt stripe very, very early. That happens all the time. Why do you think that would be?
Oh, it makes perfect sense, right? So you've got someone like, let's just look at it from a purely objective business point of view. If you got someone coming in the door, they're doing something brand new. Maybe they have a couple techniques under their belt. Haha. Maybe they don't. You want to give them positive reinforcement. Like they've tried something new. You want to say, hey, you know, stick it out. There is a light at the end of this tunnel. You are progressing. Like, well done. I have noticed you. It makes sense.
Yeah. But do you think that the majority of gyms that do that are doing it for the benefit of the positive reinforcement for the student?
So your question is, do you think that giving a stripe early is more geared toward helping the student rather than helping their business?
Yeah.
Well, maybe me being cynical, I would think it's both. But I mean, if they have a set time period where, like, hey, you know, you join the gym, you have to do X amount of sessions and then you're awarded a stripe, or X amount of weeks with a minimum of this amount of sessions to be awarded a stripe. I mean, it just helps both. I think it would depend on the gym, really.
Yeah.
Some gyms it would be monetary. Some gyms it would be the benefit of the student. It really would depend on the gym.
Most gyms who give out, I mean, look, it doesn't really matter because stripes are rather insignificant. Well, yeah. I mean, I say that now as a black belt. They're significant when you're going through the process. But yes, in the grand scheme of things, like if everyone was to be able to hypothetically go into the future where they're all black belts or whatever and look back, the stripes are rather insignificant, right? They're significant while you're going through the process. But because of that, like when they're given out super early, I mean, I know a lot of gym owners, like they do it and even a lot of gym owners do it, not just the first stripe, they do it with the blue belt as well as a way to kind of solidify the purchase of that student, right? Because then they have the student is locked in, I got my belt from so-and-so. And I mean, that bleeds into the whole incorrect culture with, you know, how gym owners try to control their students and everything. But you see that a lot as well, right? Like instructors giving that first stripe as a way to, you know, kind of
No, it makes sense.
Get that, get the student hook, line and sinker. And I mean, whatever. I mean, it doesn't really matter that much. I guess the point I'm saying is the stripes are a good tool so you can feel progression. Because if we go back to what the point we were on, which is a lot of people quitting at blue belt, right? It's a long time with what can feel like lack of progression, especially if, 2 years is the minimum. What if you're a 4 or 5 year blue belt? It's a long time. We had someone join my gym, and they joined as a blue belt. And
sorry, is this your gym here in Australia?
Yeah, yeah. And geez, I'm trying to remember how many stripes he had when he joined. He may have already had 4 stripes. Maybe. I can't recall. He had some stripes on his blue belt. And maybe he had 4. And he had already been a blue belt for like 3-4 years. And he came in and he kind of, not straight away, but he was like, how's it work? Like purple belt, blah, blah, blah. And, it's semi-taboo to ask your instructor about your belt for anyone who doesn't know. Like we spoke a little bit about like those weird unspoken rules. I'm not one of those people that if someone mentions it, I then instantly go, an extra year for you, right?
Yeah.
Some instructors literally do that. But I remember at the time I was like, oh man, look, I'm just trying to maintain the standards that I was held to. So for me, I would go, look, you're maybe like a new blue belt, And
Ooh.
for him, that was like a bit of a, that was a kick in the nuts, right? Because he's like already a 3-4 year blue belt. And then he's like just been told, well, you're going to be another minimum 2 years at this belt. But at least he was prepared for it. And then when he then got that purple belt, which he now has, felt like he earned it, right? And he's really deserving of it. So I derailed myself again. But I guess I'm just reiterating how tough blue belt can be and how long you can be there. So
I've heard stories, and you mentioned a good point. You always hear from people online, especially, this is bulk of my experience in jiu-jitsu is online. You hear from people online and they say things along the lines of, oh, okay, yep, I'm a blue belt. I've been training for 7 years, but I've changed gyms. That's why I'm not promoted. Now, in your opinion, when you have someone new come into your gym, are they automatically a brand new whatever belt they walk in that example? So you have
For me, that's how I would look at them from day one, but that could change, right? I don't want to say it's like I don't trust them. Like if someone comes in with 4 stripes on their purple belt, right? It's not like I'm not trusting that that's their level, okay? But if they're in my gym, it's my standards, right?
Yeah,
I always give the analogy that, jiu-jitsu gyms are like universities or whatever. So like if you came in saying that you're a second year med student, but then you're transferring to my university, well, man, like I'm not going to assume you don't have that knowledge, but I'm kind of also going to go, well, you have to meet the standards that are here if you want your degree to be from here. So I hold my standards above, the whatever belt they walk in the door with. And if then they go on to prove that they're well deserving of those 4 stripes, like, and that they've been a purple belt for X amount of time, I'm not necessarily going to hold them to that minimum one. The minimum time at purple belt's 1.5 years. I'm not necessarily then going to say this person has to be 1.5 years as a purple belt under me, because they've proven that they're more than capable of whatever belt. But from day one, I would look at them and go, okay, well, it's their word against my standards, and I trust my standards, right? So I would say, okay, I'm looking at you like a purple belt. And yes, sometimes you'll have people come in and, man, they're maybe already the level of a black belt. Or sometimes they come in and you're like, man, this dude should barely be wearing a blue belt, because every gym is different. I don't know where he got his from, the standards he was held to. I know my standards and the reputation I want to maintain. So, if if you don't like that, then, you know, you're free to train somewhere else, unfortunately. And when you said briefly just before, people change gyms because they don't get promoted, blah, blah, blah. I mean, look, it could happen because the instructor didn't like that person, so they didn't get promoted. But, you know, sometimes it happens because the student was not meeting the standards of that instructor. And so the student left. And I mean, you as the instructor, you then have the choice of to bend the rules and change your standards or to let that student go. And I mean, and I get it, that's hard, especially when you're the instructor and the business owner. And most jiu-jitsu gyms are a small business.
Yeah.
So like, you know, those few dollars here and there, they make a difference, right?
But it's the integrity of jiu-jitsu as a sport that you're maintaining. So you're stuck between that.
Well, and it's your reputation in the long run, right?
Yeah, that as well.
You know, you don't want to imagine if I handed out just dodgy black belts all over the place, and then it went on to people to say, I'm a black belt from Adam Childs, and they go, so that means you're shit then because he's shit. You know, like,
yeah, of course.
You know, it's my reputation as well. So I personally would, if I had students who weren't willing to do the work to meet those requirements and they chose to leave, I mean, there's plenty of other gyms that give out belts easier than I do. And I mean, that is another reason why people
tell your story walking, buddy.
You know, I don't want to sound like I'm being a douche, but you know, like if you want to be, I went through that, right? I went through. Fabio's notoriously hard to get belts from. I saw so many, dude. I couldn't tell you how many people I saw come in through Fabio's gym as a 4-stripe brown belt already, thinking they were just going to come in and train for, you know, X amount of time and then get their black belt. I remember a guy who came in as like I can't remember how many stripes on his brown belt, but he had a brown belt. Man, I think I was a brand new purple belt at the time, or I might have even been a blue belt. And I got my black belt from Fabio before he did.
Wow.
Right? Like, and I saw so many brown belts come in thinking they're just going to train for a bit and then have a Fabio Gurgel black belt. And after like 6 months or a year, they realized they're still a brown belt and they would quit. Man, he's not stupid, right? Like he knew what they were doing. And, you know, and some of them were willing to go, okay, I want a Fabio black belt. Fabio's going to, you know, he wants me to meet his standards. I'm willing to do that.
Yeah, they're trying to cheat the system.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, 100%.
And look, it's not like Fabio just by default knocked down all these guys. There were some people who came in, you know, like Izaki Bayance is a good example.
Yeah, okay.
He transferred over to
For those that don't know, like just a very quick, not history, but summary on who he is. Look him up on YouTube at least. Absolute weapon of a competitor, always featured on my Instagram stories.
Yeah, he's actually someone that I've said to Kieren, you should watch him. You could move like him. Like I used to train with Izaki and, you know, you guys are about the same size. You know, like
he's very impressive.
Do a lot of what he does. But he came over as a purple belt, incredibly high level competitor, and quite quickly got his brown and his black belt. And there's other people that have come over as brown and quite quickly got their brown belt. You know, it's not that Fabio just would instantly knock down anyone who came over at a higher belt. It was like, well, he had his standards, you know, and if people came over and wanted to join the team and met those standards, they instantly slotted in. But because he has such high standards, man, so many brown belts would come over. And at the time, there was like the group of us blue belt competitors, right? And like these brown belts would get demolished by, you know, me and all the other blue belts in the gym. And you know, and that's fine, right? Doesn't mean that guy is not a legitimate brown belt, okay? Maybe everyone is on their own journey, but, you know, the point I'm making is this guy's coming over trying to join the Fabio Gurgel Alliance competition team as a brown belt, thinking he's just going to get his black belt, and he's getting demolished by the blue belts. Like, Fabio's not going to give you your black belt. And some took it in their stride, realized that they would be brown belt for the next 7 years or something, and stuck it out and got their black belt from Fabio. You know, whereas other people were like there for 6 months, all right, I'm out, and they would quit.
Yeah.
And then I would see them. I still have a lot of these people on Instagram. They, not long after are a black belt from so and so. So some people are happy to just get the belt regardless of who it's from. It's up to the individual. If you don't like it, you can train somewhere else where it's easier. If Harvard Law School's too difficult, go to TAFE. You can probably get your certificate there.
Yeah. Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yeah. It does make sense. So unless you get a black belt from Fabio, you've got your black belt from a TAFE.
No, I'm not doing
I'm joking. I'm totally joking. No one thinks that you said that. No. But I just want to circle back to the point that we got to, then got a little bit derailed. That's not a theme of this podcast at all. When we were talking about the difference between a white belt essentially getting it on time, or you get your foundation, you show up, you're consistent, you get your blue belt. Whereas from my view, the step between blue and purple is purely on how much do you know, what your jiu-jitsu level is. The element of time, you mentioned IBJJF recommends, it states a minimum of 2 years at that belt. Yep. However, that you said that is the exception, not the rule, when it comes to blue to purple. So does that mean, in your opinion, that from blue to purple is definitely more skill-based? So if you run into a purple belt under Adam Childs, they're going to be a purple belt, if that makes sense.
I would agree with that. Yeah, I think
and that contributes to the whole
the transition from white to blue can be a little bit just more oh man, you've learnt the things you need to know, you're doing the right things, let's take it to the next level, Whereas blue to purple is a little bit more man, you're starting to, you're now that middle belt, you're now getting more to advance, so you need to really know what's up, and you need to not necessarily be the toughest dude in the gym, because everyone is on their own journey. Some people start training at 50, and then to think that this, 55-year-old purple belt has to be able to beat, 4-stripe 18-year-old white belt who's, two different stories, right? But I mean, it definitely needs to be more. For me, if you want your purple belt, it's definitely, it gets progressively harder, it's funny because the IBJJF regulations on belt time go down. So blue's 2 years, purple's 1.5, brown is 1.
1, right.
But
and there's no minimum time at white belt under the IBJJF.
I believe it used to be 1 year, but there's not anymore.
Yeah.
Whereas, for me, it gets harder the other way around, right? So the minimum time is shorter by IBJJF, but chances are you're going to be longer at purple than you were at blue, longer at brown than you were at purple a lot of the time, right? So, blue to purple for me is, definitely a lot more based on your performance and your knowledge, how well you execute things. It's, I believe in belt tests. A lot of gyms don't do belt tests.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I noticed that. And now I'm going to just jump in here. I think if I was to guess, that comes from your time at Alliance, because when I've done research on, the content, the jiu-jitsu content out there, blue belt test is a very popular topic, or how to get blue belt.
Yeah.
And 90% of the content out there on blue belt test comes from Alliance blue belt test. Oh, really? Yeah, because
that's funny, because I would argue that Gracie Baja are more.
Well, that's not what I've seen, because the Alliance blue belt curriculum is public. So anyone from any gym can download the Alliance blue belt curriculum.
Right.
These are the things that you will be tested on, and then they base their study off of that public document. I haven't seen it. I haven't downloaded it. I don't need it. No, no, joking.
Yeah, because you ain't doing your test no time soon.
Yeah, exactly. No. I'll start studying next year when it's relevant. So that's interesting. Is that true?
A lot of people, don't agree with belt tests. The reason I like belt tests is because it's kind of like the instructor in me, right? I want to make sure the student actually understands what's going on. And I think a blue belt test is super important, because sometimes people can just do movements or do techniques or get away with whatever in a role because they're athletic or whatever it is, and that's fine. Obviously, it's a physical sport. But if you're a blue belt, and then let's say it's a belt test, or you're a white belt, doing your blue belt test, and I say, okay, show me the bridge escape from mount, or show me an elbow escape from mount, okay? I don't need you to execute it as perfect as a black belt would execute it. That would be a ridiculous requirement, right? But if you are just then like, oh, like you don't know how, right? Or, I say like, okay, show me how to, escape a guillotine, or show me particularly the self-defense movements, right? And I think I've spoken before why they're super important, because it's something relatable for beginners, right? It doesn't make sense if you get a white belt on their first day and say, oh, hold the sleeve, this, that. And why would I hold someone's sleeve? But if you say they're trying to punch you, self-defense is a great way to teach movements and control in jiu-jitsu. So if you're then doing a white belt doing a blue belt test and you don't know any of that stuff, right? You don't know how to do a shoulder roll correctly to make sure you don't hurt your neck, or make sure your tailbone doesn't hit the ground, and all this stuff. And then I give you your blue belt. And then what happens when, I've got my back turned and I'm helping someone else, and then a white belt looks to you because you're wearing a blue belt and says, oh, how do I do this? And you don't know, right? I mean, the bigger problem is that you tell them something wrong and then they hurt themselves. But, second to that is you're going to look stupid, right? And like that makes me look stupid. Okay, so that's why I like belt tests, all right? It's not this trivial thing to make money from. I mean, I assume some gyms do, right?
Some charge for a belt test.
Yeah, I mean, and some, for example, some gyms, what they'll do, I mean, every gym's different, bro. Some gyms will do belt tests and they won't charge you anything. Some gyms will give you a belt and then, afterwards charge you for the cost of the belt, a lot of these things. Which is fine, because you forget it's a business. It's a business. A lot of gyms are small businesses, and if you're giving out, if you're giving out 100 belts a year at $20 a pop, adds up, right? For
$2,000.
Yeah, for small businesses, that can be make a huge difference between whether you get to have a holiday or whatever, or pay rent, right? But yeah, anyway. For me, it's not about this like revenue generating thing, right? I charge for belt tests, but I lose money when what I charge for a belt test. I probably I don't want to go into how I run my business, but I probably lose I don't know, maybe $100, because the belt test has got to cover my time, right? It's got to cover the cost of the belt. It covers the cost of the certificate that I go and print and make for the student, right?
It's not about the cost, right?
It's not about the cost. I'm just trying to recoup some of the costs. But even then, I lose money on belt tests, okay? I'm just trying to make it so I don't lose as much. But anyway, some people don't understand that and they think it's just this money scheme. No, it's not, right? I guess hypothetically.
In other sports it could be. I know that
in other sports.
Karate, I don't want to shit on karate, but I'm going to. In karate, their belt test, their grading system, every time you get graded, you got to pay a large sum. It's not No,
it's not a small. It's usually quite a huge chunk.
It's hundreds of dollars or whatever. It was at least when I was looking into it years and years ago when I was a kid. And then each belt you pay for, you pay out the nose for everything. The whole thing is geared toward making money. And that's why, as you mentioned, you can go from white belt to black belt in less than 3 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Some gyms, exactly, they do that. They'll charge a huge amount of money, right?
And then all of a sudden you have someone run around saying they're karate black belt but can't hold their own in a schoolyard scrap because they know nothing.
Yeah.
I've seen that.
But anyway, if we ignore the financial side of things, that's why I do belt tests. I want to know that my students understand what they're doing. And I guess, that's part of me going down the instructor path, right? I want to, if it's a competitor, it's slightly different. If someone comes to me and they're like, man, I want to be a world champion, you kind of base their belts off their performance, right? I'm not saying they have to be the best white belt in the world before they get a blue belt, and they need to be a blue belt world champion before they get a purple. But I mean, if you're a blue belt, right, like, and you want to be a world champion, well, you're not going to be getting your purple if you still lose to, white belts who have been training for 2 months, right? Like, I mean, what's going to happen then when you're wearing a purple belt, right? Like, it's different. But otherwise, I want to make sure
Different from sandbagging as well, right?
Yeah, that's a thing. Yeah. But I want to make sure my students understand what they're doing. I don't want my blue belts, purple belts, brown belts walking around, and then when a lower belt asks them a question, they have no idea. Okay, they don't have to be perfect. They're not an instructor. Someone I've given a blue belt to is not an instructor, but I want them to be able to answer questions from other and help other students, and when someone asks them, or, God forbid they get in a street fight, I want to know that they know these things.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, the belt carries weight.
Yeah.
Carries skill, expectation.
But I do just want to, I know we're getting towards the end of the episode, but I think another important factor as to why people quit at blue belt is that for some people, blue belt is their black belt. Some people just wanted to achieve that goal, right? Like, not everyone wants a black belt, or not everyone wants to do it forever. Some people get into, how some people are, what are they called when someone just constantly studies and, oh my God, I'm blanking on the name. Like, people who just acquire degrees and certificates, they're just like a perpetual student forever.
Yeah.
Because they like it, they enjoy it. So some people never have the end game goal. Or sorry, they do have an end game goal. Their goal was just to get, a blue belt. And that happens in lots of sports. So some people might, take up rock climbing with the goal of climbing an 8A, for example, right? Which is, how you grade the difficulty in rock climbing walls, right? And they might achieve that 8A climb and then move on to a different goal in their life, So some people quit at blue belt because it was just their personal goal, right? And that's fine, right? Not everyone needs to start the sport and do it forever, right? Maybe you just wanted to achieve your blue belt or your purple belt, whatever it was, and then move on. And you see that at black belt as well. I mean, I think that's a bit, if I had that vibe for my student, I wouldn't want to give them a black belt and then have them quit, because I think black belt's something a bit more, right? Like, doesn't mean you have to be someone who's choosing jiu-jitsu as a career, but for me, a black belt, jiu-jitsu has to be a very important part of your life, right? For you to earn that belt. However, you still see it. You see people get a black belt and they achieve the goal, and then they move on. So you see that at blue belt too. That was that individual's goal. Oh, I just wanted to, I just wanted to I just wanted to learn to surf till I could stand up, Oh, I can now stand up and catch a wave. And the person moves on, right? They never really were invested in the sport as part of their life.
They never really knew how to surf.
And they never really knew how to surf. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. It's like they join the sport with the goal of being a jiu-jitsu blue belt, because infamously, from the outside looking in, jiu-jitsu belts are hard to acquire. Like, it's
compared to other martial arts.
Yeah, it's pretty well known. Like,
significantly more difficult.
If you do any sort of research, I suppose if you walk in the gym and think it's karate, whatever. But if you do any sort of research, maybe you're a fan of MMA, you've watched the UFC, you've looked into jiu-jitsu before you step your foot in your first gym or what have you. There is an understanding that a black belt takes a long time, and a black belt is very, very skilled in jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
So I think, it makes sense that someone would come in with the goal of being a blue belt, because, again, as we mentioned, it's still a very good achievement. Takes, on average, over a year to get. Yeah. So,
and it's funny, like, I remember when I was going through it, like, I didn't train for long before I decided that I wanted my career to be jiu-jitsu. So I was always in it for the long haul, but even going through it, I still had like those the shorter term goals. I remember I was like, I just want my blue belt because then I'm, I'll just feel better when I'm a blue belt because then I'm not a white belt anymore.
I can relate to that. I can 100%. Man, sitting here is like, 10, 11 month white belt. I can 100% relate to that.
Yeah. Well, I got some bad news for you because
You fucker.
because then when I got my blue belt, I was like, oh, cool. I just want to get my purple belt.
Because
then when I get my purple
I'm in the
belt,
club.
I'm no longer that. Oh, I mean, blue belt's not that hard to get. You're just one after white. If I get my purple, I'm then, another degree of separation away from white. I just want my purple, then I can relax. And then I got my purple belt and I was like, I just want to get my brown. Because then when I get my brown, people look at you like, man, that dude's almost a black belt.
May as well be a black belt, yeah.
And then obviously you get your brown belt and then you're like, well, just one more belt. I want my black belt.
Come on, Fabio. Come on, man.
Yeah. And I remember
it's perpetual. The goal post is always moving.
Always. Yeah. And like when, before Fabio used to give stripes, right? When I was a blue belt, I was, I've said this before. I hate saying it because I sound like a wank, but at the time I was a blue belt, like I was a really good blue belt. Everyone in the gym was like, and you got
my mum said I was good.
Yeah, my mum always.
My friend said I was good. One guy on Instagram said it was cool.
Like it was the time that I was in Brazil was before no-gi exploded and before, flow grappling dictated who was relevant in jiu-jitsu. And it was all IBJJF. Alliance was the won worlds every year. And even now they won the last worlds, right? Anyway, was before Atos, managed to win worlds twice. It was, we dominated everything. And even at that time, everyone was like, all my fellow training partners, colored belts, black belts alike, dude, you're the best blue belt in the world. Like, man, let's go to worlds. Like, there's no way you lose, blah, blah, blah. Like, it was really talented blue belt. And every time gradings came along, which they don't really do anymore, Fabio doesn't do gradings the way he grades his students, which is also how I grade my students. I don't really do gradings. I grade everyone individually. But anyway, story for another time. And every grading, Fabio, people would be like, man, for sure you're getting your purple belt. There's no way you're not getting your purple belt. And then I wouldn't get it, right? And Fabio did gradings like only 2 a year. And then people would be like, don't worry, man, next one, like there's no way you don't get it next one now. You didn't get it this time, so you'll have to get it next time. Next grading, like, man, there's no way you don't get your purple belt. And then I wouldn't get it. And people were like, man, there's no way you don't get it next time.
These dudes
right?
are G'ing you up hard. They had inside information.
Yeah, turns out I was terrible. They were just like trying to pump me up.
Yeah.
And then a grading came along where Fabio gave the big speech similar to what I just said about stripes, that he was going to start implementing stripes on people's belts. It's a good way to, keep people in check and motivate them and, so people know they're on the right path and everything. Everyone's like, man, you're getting your purple belt. And Fabio called me up and he just, in the one go, just put 4 stripes on my blue belt and just sat me back down.
Motherfucker.
and then everyone was like, well, at least now next time it will be the purple belt. Like you got nowhere else to go.
Yeah.
I remember I was like, oh, it's just.
Man, that's like 2 years of just people teasing you.
A little bit. But anyway, and then, at least then when I got the purple belt, I knew I deserved it. Actually, no, I even doubted it a little bit because like I said before, I was just coming back from an injury. Yeah. So I was a little bit like, but anyway, stripes.
Don't quit. Don't quit at blue belt.
But
That's the key takeaway.
I think we might leave it around there, but just to summarize some of what we went over, I guess the core things would be, you need to be set up the student from the beginning. You want to give them the best chance to continue the sport from day one, right? You want to make sure that from day one, you're checking all these boxes of how you should interact with a brand new student so they're on the correct path, right? But after that, why do people quit? Injury, right? As a result or maybe not as a result, injuries can just happen anyway. Injuries is a big reason why people quit. The realization of how hard it is, right?
That's the ego getting in your way. That sort
ego
of piece.
getting in your way. The time at blue belt, right? And for some people, things like blue belt was their goal from the beginning. And once they get that, they kind of, they move on.
That's what I'm doing.
That's what you're. Yeah, that's why I'm never giving it to you, right? I mean, and it goes the other way too. I have 2 infamous students named Dan and Jake, right? That I specifically gave them their blue belts to try to get rid of them. I was hoping they would leave, and they just won't leave.
If you're listening, Dan and Jake, if it's not clear, it never will be.
Yeah, no, I mean, for those who don't know Dan and Jake, 2 of my favorite students with me from.
You have favorites? What the hell, man? you can't sit across the table and say that to my face.
They were with me from the beginning. They joined, I think, completely brand new to jiu-jitsu, like 1 week after I opened. And for a lot of the classes, it was just us 3, So they were some of my first students, and they're still training with me now, so super, super happy to have them with me.
Shout out to Dan and Jake.
Shout out to Dan and Jake,
the world's
married couple.
Blue belt. Okay.
World's longest blue belts, yeah.
Well, thanks for listening. You've been listening to the Beyond Jiu Jitsu podcast.
Wicka, what?
You've got to stop doing that. Thanks for listening, and catch you next time.
Laters.